What if Christmas was never meant to be comforting? What if behind the lights, the carols, and the warmth of the fire, there still lingers the echo of something older, darker, and merciless? Imagine the frozen heart of winter, thousands of years ago, when the sun vanished for weeks, when hunger gnawed at villages. Families gathered around flickering fires, whispering prayers, not for joy but for survival. For they believed that winter nights were not empty, they were haunted. Across the dark sky thundered Odin and his wild hunt, a spectral host of riders collecting souls of the doomed. In the valleys, children whispered of Perchta, the winter witch, who would slip down chimneys and slice open the bellies of the disobedient. From the forests came the sound of chains, as horned demons dragged the wicked into the snow. These were not tales for comfort, but warnings. The season of Christmas was first the season of judgment. And yet, through centuries, these shadows were not erased. They were reborn. The warmth of Santa's smile hides bones older than Christ, older than Rome, older even than the first churches. The gifts and stockings are masks stitched over rituals of blood and fear. So we must ask, what if the red suit and the sleigh are only a disguise? And Christmas is not the birth of joy, but the return of something far more ancient, spirits of winter cloaked in merriment, still watching from the dark. To understand the darkness at the root of Christmas, we must return to a Europe before Christ, before churches, before even written history and age, when the rhythms of survival were written by the sun and the soil. In those days, the year's greatest terror was not war or plague, but winter. When the sun sank low and the nights stretched without end, food stores dwindled, and entire villages shivered under the shadow of famine. Every December, men and women feared that the sun might not return, that the warmth of life might vanish forever. Out of this fear came ritual. Out of this fear came myth. In Rome, the answer was Saturnalia, dedicated to Saturn, the god of sowing and time. This festival overturned order in the darkest days. Masters served their slaves, gambling was permitted, and the streets filled with wild processions. It was a carnival of excess against the abyss, a desperate feast before the scarcity of winter. Candles blazed in defiance of the long night, gifts were exchanged as charms of fortune, and masks hid faces in a parody of chaos. But hidden beneath the laughter was dread, the acknowledgement that time itself could turn, that Saturn, the devourer of his children, still lurked behind the holiday's smile. Far to the north, in the icy forests of Scandinavia and Germany, the people lit fires for Yule. Logs as vast as tree trunks were dragged into hearths, meant to burn for 12 nights without dying. Each spark was an invocation, a prayer that the sun's flame would not fade from the heavens. Animals were slaughtered in sacrifice, their blood sprinkled to honor the gods and ancestors. Ale flowed in endless toasts, not for joy alone, but to numb the fear that the world itself could freeze and fracture. For in those endless nights, the boundary between the living and the dead was thought too thin. Spirits walked freely among the breathing. The Wild Hunt was said to ride at Odin, astride his 8-legged steed Sleipnir, leading a host of the dead across the stormy sky. Those caught in its path could be swept away forever, their souls conscripted into the spectral cavalcade. To hear the rushing wind was to hear hooves and hounds. To see lightning was to glimpse the hunt's torches. It was not carolers who passed through villages in those nights, but death itself. In alpine lands, winter belonged to figures of punishment. Perchta was a goddess turned witch, roaming from house to house to ensure that spinning and weaving were complete. Those who obeyed tradition were rewarded. Those who disobeyed were cut open, their entrails replaced with straw and stones. She embodied the merciless side of winter, its demand for discipline, its wrath against idleness. Around her clustered dark companions, horned spirits, shaggy demons who dragged chains and beat the wicked with birch rods. Even the more playful spirits of winter carried weight. In Scandinavia, the Tomte or niece crept through barns and hearths, guardians of households, but easily offended. A forgotten offering of porridge could mean spoiled food, overturned carts, or illness among livestock. The Yule goat, remembered today in straw ornaments, was once linked to sacrifice and dread, an echo of Thor's goats. It was killed and resurrected, a cycle of life and death bound to the wheel of winter. In all these traditions, the same truth echoed. The darkness of December was not merely seasonal. It was spiritual. It was the time when boundaries broke, when gods, ghosts, and monsters walked beside mortals. Rituals of fire, feasts, and gifts were not born of joy. They were acts of appeasement, offerings to survive another year. When Christianity spread across Europe, it did not erase these fears. It cloaked them. The Church declared December 25th the birth of Christ, but beneath that date throbbed older rhythms. The Christ child was laid atop the bones of Saturn, Odin, and Perchta. Saints inherited the roles of gods. Saint Nicholas judged children as once Perchta did, rewarding the obedient and condemning the disobedient. Caroling echoed the processions of Saturnalia. The Yule log became Christian hearthfire. The tree lit with candles mirrored pagan charms against darkness. The old spirits never died. They were baptized and renamed. Thus, the background of Christmas is not the story of comfort, but the story of survival. It is the attempt to dress terror in light, to cover dread with feasting, to transform rituals of fear into rituals of joy. But beneath the songs, the myths still whisper. Beneath Santa's beard, Odin still rides. Beneath the stockings, Perchta still waits. Beneath the gifts, Saturn still devours. And so the roots of Christmas are entangled in shadows. What we call a season of peace began as a season of peril. It's time when humanity stared into the abyss of winter and offered whatever it could to keep the sun alive. The discovery of Christmas's shadows begins not in bright chapels, but in the long black nights when villagers swore they heard hooves in the storm. Odin's Wild Hunt was the first and greatest revelation. When the wind howled and trees bent like reeds, people whispered that it was not weather, but the gallop of Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse. Sparks of lightning were the torches of his ghostly riders, their howls the baying of spectral hounds. Those unlucky enough to step outside on such nights could be seized, their souls torn from their bodies to join the hunt forever. Children were taught to stay inside, doors barred, fires stoked. Yet even behind walls, they trembled at the sound of the storm, because what they feared was not nature, but a god's procession of the dead. But Odin was not alone. In the Alpine valleys, another figure stalked winter nights. Perchta, or Perchta. By day, she was spoken of as a goddess of fate, guardian of spinning and weaving. But in winter, she turned merciless. She slipped down chimneys or entered through cracks in doors, her white face glowing in darkness. She carried a long knife, and it was said she slit open the bellies of disobedient children, stuffing them with straw and stones before stitching them shut. Her presence was marked by silence, no storm, no howl lonely, a sudden stillness. The sense that something had entered the room. Parents invoked her name not for comfort, but as a warning. Be industrious, be obedient, or Perchta will come. Beside her, darker companions multiplied. Krampus horned, hairy half-demon dragged chains that rattled like thunder. He carried a bundle of birch rods to strike the wicked, and a basket on his back to carry children away. Where Perchta judged, Krampus punished. He was the living embodiment of fear, a reminder that December was not a month of peace but of reckoning. To hear chains clattering outside was to know that judgment had come, that the night itself had teeth. Yet not all spirits were vast and terrifying. Some were small, domestic, but no less unsettling. In Scandinavia, families whispered of the Tomt or Nis, spirits who lurked around barns and hearths. They were guardians, protectors of livestock, but quick to anger if neglected. A bowl of porridge had to be left for them on Christmas Eve, or misfortune would follow cows sickening, tools breaking, milk souring. The Tom's eyes were said to glow in the dark, watching from rafters or corners, tiny but unblinking. Children learned that gifts and chores were not rewards but bargains, offerings to keep unseen eyes appeased. Then there was the Yule goat, today remembered in straw ornaments. In old days, it was a darker symbol. Some said it was the spirit of Thor's goats, which he killed and resurrected, bones cracking, flesh renewed. Others claimed it was a demonic figure that demanded offerings, a creature that roamed villages during Yule to ensure rituals were observed. Young men once dressed as the goat, wearing horns, draped in hides, breaking into homes with wild shouts. The goat was both gift giver and threat. embodying the dual face of winter: bounty and terror, life and death intertwined. Each of these discoveries layered upon the other, weaving a tapestry of shadows. Odin hunted above, Perchta and Krampus judged within. Tomt lurked in the rafters, and the Yule goat stamped through the snow. For ancient Europeans, December was not merely the end of the year. It was the season when the world was thinnest, when gods and spirits pressed closest to human lives. Every flicker of firelight was surrounded by darkness teeming with presence. Every custom feast, gift, sacrifice was an attempt to negotiate with those presences. To survive their scrutiny for one more year, to encounter these beings was to encounter the truth of Christmas's origin, that it was never about merriment alone. It was about judgment, discipline, survival. The Wild Hunt taught obedience through fear of being taken. Perchta enforced work and tradition with her knife. Krampus punished disobedience with blows and chains. The Tomt reminded families to respect unseen guardians. The Yule goat embodied the sacrifice that underpinned renewal. Together, they revealed Christmas as a season not of comfort, but of confrontation with the abyss of winter. These figures were not fairy tales for children. They were laws of survival, codified in myth. They taught that winter was merciless, and only discipline, offerings, and obedience could see one through to spring. To ignore them was to risk the wrath of beings older than Christendom. Beings who wore the face of gods, beasts, and demons, but spoke with the voice of winter itself. Thus, the discovery of Christmas's dark origins is not a pleasant unveiling, but a chilling realization that the holiday we dress in light and song began as a pact with shadows. And those shadows, though renamed and disguised, have never truly vanished. They still breathe in the rituals we repeat, still watch from the dark corners of December nights. The longest night had come. Snow buried the fields in silence, and the moon was a pale scar above the frozen world. In the villages, families huddled by fire, eyes fixed on the door, ears straining for sounds beyond the walls. For everyone knew this was the night when the veil was thinnest, when the old gods and spirits rode again. It was not a night of celebration, it was a night of judgment. The first sign was the wind. It did not whistle or howl. It thundered, as though hooves pounded the air itself. Dogs whined and hid under tables. Men crossed themselves, though the gesture brought no comfort. Above, a storm gathered not from clouds but from souls. The Wild Hunt had arrived. Odin led it, his cloak of storm clouds billowing, his single eye burning like lightning. Behind him stretched a cavalcade of riders. Warriors long dead, faces twisted in spectral rage, their cries like the tearing of sails in a gale. They swept across the sky, and every child knew that to glimpse them was to risk being taken into their host forever. But even as the hunt passed overhead, worse terrors stirred closer to home. From chimneys and cracks in doors came the pale shape of Perchta. Her face was as white as snow, her eyes hollow pits that reflected firelight. She carried her knife not as weapon but as law, and her breath smelled of frost and iron. She moved silently from house to house, peering into beds where children slept. Those who had obeyed tradition, who had spun their flax and kept their chores, she passed over. But those who had not, those who had been idle or defiant, she marked. And when she left, the house was not quieter but emptier, the silence broken only by the faint sound of straw shifting where a child had once breathed. Then came the chains. From the forest echoed a metallic rattle, followed by guttural laughter. Krampus emerged, horns curling, tongue lolling, eyes burning with cruel fire. He dragged his chains across the snow, sparks hissing as they struck stone. In one hand he carried birch rods, striking doors, punishing the guilty. On his back, a wicker basket loomed, and those who resisted were thrust inside, their cries muffled as he disappeared into the darkness. Villagers told their children that only obedience could keep him at bay on this night. Obedience was not always enough. Sometimes, terror itself was the tribute he demanded. Amid these greater terrors, smaller figures scurried. The Tomt slipped through barns and kitchens, eyes glowing like embers. They inspected gifts left for them, bowls of porridge steaming on thresholds. Those who forgot suffered mischief. Tools broken, livestock struck ill, cupboards overturned. But those who remembered found protection, their homes guarded from the greater wrath outside. the Tompt were neither saviors nor demons. They were the reminder that even the smallest spirits demanded respect, that no household could ignore the unseen. And then, stamping through the snow, came the Yule goat. Larger than life, horns twisted toward the stars, it strode through villages with a presence that was both holy and menacing. Some said it carried gifts, tokens for the worthy. Others swore it demanded sacrifice, taking food, drink, even blood in exchange for safety. Its breath steamed like smoke, and when it bellowed, roofs shook as if Thor himself had struck with his hammer. Lo. On this night, winter's judgment night, there was no single figure of Christmas. There was a storm of them. Odin's hunt above, Perchta's knife within, Krampus's chains at the door, Tompt's glowing eyes in the rafters, the goat's shadow in the snow. Together they formed a tapestry of terror, each reinforcing the same law. Winter spares no one, and only those who obey ritual may survive. For the people, this was the climax of their year. Every custom feast, fire, offering led to this moment. The darkness was not random, it was trial. To live through it was to be judged and found worthy. To fail was to vanish into the hunt, into the knife, into the chains, into the maw of the goat. Cinematic imagery saturates this night. Picture a family huddled inside, fire crackling low, while outside the sky churns with riders, the snow echoes with laughter, and shadows slip through keyholes. The air itself feels alive, thick with presences unseen but certain. No gift, no candle, no prayer feels enough. Every creak of wood could be a footstep, every gust of wind a breath against the window. To endure until dawn is not celebration but survival. This is the true climax of Christmas's ancient origins. Not peace on earth, but terror in the dark. The holiday began not as comfort, but as confrontation, a struggle between human fragility and the abyss of winter. And though the names have changed, though the stories have softened, that confrontation lingers still. For when we dress Christmas in lights and laughter, we do not erase its shadows, we only mask them. And sometimes, in the silence between carols, in the flicker of candlelight against the window, we might still sense them, the riders. The witch, the demon, the goat, the watchful eyes of spirits older than Christ, older than joy. To interpret Christmas is to peel away its red and gold wrappings, until only bone remains. Beneath the songs and gifts lies an older truth. The holiday is not a celebration of comfort, but an engine of judgment. Its original form was never about joy, but about survival, obedience, and fear. Every figure of the winter pantheon, Odin, Perchta, Krampus, Tompt, the Yule goat, functioned not as entertainers, but as enforcers. They watched, they measured, they punished. In this sense, Christmas has always been less a feast and more a tribunal. Consider Odin's Wild Hunt. To glimpse it was to risk being taken, your soul swept away into endless servitude. It was the sky itself transformed into surveillance, the storm clouds turning into watchmen. Perchta inspected children's bellies for discipline, punishing idleness with a knife. Krampus carried chains to bind the disobedient, a reminder that misbehavior did not end in correction, but in abduction. Even the Tompt, small and household bound, enforced ritual offerings. Forget a bowl of porridge, and the unseen hand of punishment would twist your life into disorder. Together, these spirits embodied the ancient understanding that in winter, nothing was free. Every act of survival required payment, obedience, sacrifice. When Christianity absorbed these traditions, it did not erase their logic. It sanctified it. Saint Nicholas became the smiling face of judgment, rewarding the good with gifts and condemning the wicked to switches or coal. The church rebranded ancient fears as holy morality, yet the structure remained identical, an omniscient figure who sees all, judges all, and divides the worthy from the damned. Christmas was reborn not as liberation from fear, but as fear in gentler robes. As the centuries turned and empires shifted, the archetype transformed again. In America, Santa Claus emerged, droves, cheeked, jolly, clothed in red. Yet behind the laughter, the bones of Odin and Krampus still rattled. Santa keeps a list. He sees you when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake. His gaze penetrates walls and oceans. He is everywhere, omnipresent, omniscient. The language is playful, but the structure is authoritarian. The child is taught that every action is monitored, every behavior noted, and that consequences will follow. Obedience is purchased not through direct terror, but through internalized surveillance. The red suit conceals not joy, but the continuation of the ancient tribunal. This is why even modern iterations of the holiday echo older fears. The elf on the shelf fad, introduced in the 21st century, is nothing less than a household spirit reborn. The doll watches silently, reports back to Santa, and enforces discipline. It is the tomte, dressed in plastic, the ghost of surveillance disguised as a toy. Parents laugh, children shiver, but the pattern repeats. You are always watched. Christmas becomes not merely a holiday, but a training ground in obedience. On a deeper archetypal level, this reveals Christmas as a ritual of inversion and control. In Saturnalia, slaves became masters for a day. Chaos erupted in order's absence, but the return of hierarchy was all the stronger. In Yule, villagers feasted in excess, not because they believed in joy, but because they feared scarcity. These rituals are not contradictions, they are strategies. By indulging in laughter, by disguising fear and festivity, the abyss was acknowledged and appeased. Modern Christmas follows the same rhythm. Lights blaze not because the world is safe, but because darkness presses in. Gifts are exchanged not because abundance is natural, but because scarcity still haunts us. Santa smiles not because judgment is gone, but because judgment has learned to smile. Philosophically, this pattern reflects a human truth. We cannot banish fear, so we ritualize it. We dress it in color, music, and myth. We convert the thread of Odin's hunt into carols, the knife of Perchta into candy canes, the chains of Krampus into ribbons, but the archetype remains untouched. Christmas functions as a seasonal reminder that order must be maintained, that obedience is rewarded, that rebellion is punished. It is an annual rehearsal of submission, disguised as celebration. In psychological terms, this creates what Carl Jung would call the shadow of joy. Behind every light, there is darkness. Behind every gift, there is threat. Children instinctively sense it. The line "he sees you when you're sleeping" does not comfort. It chills. The wide-eyed smile of Santa, for all its warmth, conceals a gaze that never blinks. The Christmas myth, in all its forms, encodes the same message. You are watched. You are judged, and your survival depends on compliance. And yet therein lies its power. Myths survive not because they are true in fact, but because they are true in structure. Christmas has endured because it answers a primal need. The need to feel that someone, whether God, saint, or spirit, controls the chaos of winter. In that sense, Santa is not merely a cultural invention. He's the archetype reborn, the winter judge in a softer mask. Behind him stand Odin, Perchta, Krampus, the tomte, and the goat. He does not erase them. He contains them. Thus, the interpretation of Christmas is not that it was invented in joy. It is that it was resurrected from fear. Every stocking hung, every gift exchanged, every carol sung carries within it a shadow older than Christianity, older than Rome, older than civilization. The red suit hides bones. The sleigh is pulled not only by reindeer but by echoes of hoofbeats from the Wild Hunt. The jingle of days is the rattle of chains reborn. To see Christmas clearly is not to strip away its beauty but to acknowledge its depth. It is both light and shadow, gift and threat, joy and judgment. It is a mirror of humanity's oldest fear, that winter will consume us and our oldest defense. To mask fear with ritual, to turn terror into celebration, to sing in the dark. But when the songs fade and the lights die, the truth remains. The old spirits are still there, watching, waiting, judging, hidden behind the mask of a smile. The lights burn bright on Christmas Eve. Stockings hang by the fire, children drift to sleep with dreams of gifts, and families whisper prayers of peace. Yet outside, the wind howls like distant hooves, and the snow carries shapes that never fully vanish. The red-suited figure who slips into homes may smile with warmth, but behind him trail older shadows. Wild riders, Burka's knife, Krampus's chains, the goat's heavy breath. We celebrate as if the darkness has been banished, yet every candle is lit against something still watching. The holiday comforts us only because it masks the tribunal that once ruled these nights. Perhaps it is easier to imagine Santa as jolly than as judge, to forget that Christmas began not with joy, but with fear. And so the question lingers, sharp as frost against the window. What if Christmas joy is only a mask? The old spirits are still here silent, waiting, watching from the dark. Thank you for walking with us into the shadows of winter, where Christmas is revealed not as comfort, but as memory of fear. Do you believe Santa is truly a saint of joy, or only the mask of older spirits who still judge in silence? Share your thoughts below. Like this video, subscribe to Dark Mythology, and return as we continue to unearth forbidden myths. For the fire may warm us, but the darkness of December is never far away.